Good morning, everybody. We are live with our Torah study, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. The new chapter begins today. We're going to be studying the laws of Challah. And it sounds like, how do you eat challah? And it's not what it is. And we'll get more into that, and we'll explain what it's all about. It's a big mitzvah that we can all do. And wanted to thank Zach Richardson for the lovely comment on Twitter. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoy listening in England to our daily Torah study. Thank you so much for reaching out. And if anybody else is watching, we love hearing from you. We're learning Aliyas Neshama Avimori Moshe Ben Chaim. We're learning also for a refuah shlema, for healing for all those who are in need of a speedy recovery. Also have in mind missing photojournalist Max Levin in Ukraine. L'chaim.
Oh no, I didn't know about the journalist.
Yes, I just saw that. So let's have him in mind. Very talented photojournalist in Ukraine who is hopefully just off radar, or yes, we'll just pray for his safety and safe return. Have in mind all those who need a complete healing. Yisrael ben Yocheved, Aliza Chana, Bastin Ariela, Herschel Ben Chaim, Ben Sheva Le, Bat Freiden, Avram Ben Mindel, Ruth Basar Goldman, Yitzchak Ben Dvorah, David Ben Mindel, Avram Ben Gittel, Avram Ben Shoshana, David Ben Dvorah, Mai Bet Sarah, Chaim, David Ben Ezer Ben Zerum Losh Ben Sarah, Bat Shev Bracha, Chai Bat Sarah, Rina Bat Etel Nachman, Hershel Zilia, Michael Ben Tzipora, Avram Shimon Ben Sarah Leah, Ben Julia, Harry Bat Lillian, Ben Sarah, Ben Sarah, Arya Ben Esther, Yeshua Ben Bluma, Chabas Dina, Claris Bat Et, Yonasan Meir Ben Carmen Rosa, and all those who need a refuah shlema. Oh, so turn to chapter 35 in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And there are a lot of terms that are going to come up in this chapter and in coming chapters. And as we get to those terms and those concepts, we're going to pause, we'll look at them, feel like we have a good handle on them, and then come back to the text. So what are the laws of Challah? So the Torah in Bamidbar, which is Numbers in English, chapter 15, verse 17 to 21, explains the commandment of Challah. And Challah is about dough. So when you're creating this dough, when you're making this dough, you have to set aside a portion of the dough to be given to the Kohen. This portion of dough that you take and give to the Kohen is called Challah. Challah actually means a loaf, and it's the portion separated for the Kohen. And we also call the loaves of bread that we bake we bake for the Sabbath as Challah. And so you have two things called Challah. You have the things on our table, and then you have the portion of dough which you're going to give to the Kohen. A little complicated. They're both called Challah. So in order for us to eat our Challah, i.e. the bread that we eat, we have to take a portion of that bread when there's certain circumstances and give it to the Kohen. Now, you'll see right today, there aren't receptacles around town. Drop off your dough for the Kohens. I have some Kohens around the corner. They probably wouldn't like it if I just dumped some raw dough at their doorstep. So, well, let's look into this. So another thing, in order for the challah to be eaten by the Kohen, The challah and the Kohen have to be tahor. They have to be in a state of ritual purity. And challah can become impure, ritually impure. And so if it does, it can't be eaten and it has to be burned, like when you put it in the toaster on high. Now, today, we do not have the level of purity needed. The spiritual purity we need to eat actual ritual challah, we can't achieve. So the challah that we would be taking aside and giving to the Kohen, we burn it. And this mitzvah is a Torah commandment, right? It's a biblical. And it applied when the Jewish people, specifically were in Eretz Yisrael, and only when all the Jewish people resided there. But the sages, Chazal, extended the requirement beyond the biblical obligation to require the separation of challah to apply at all places in all times. And if you look, this is in Yoredeah. This is one of the chapters of the Shulchan Aruch, one of the volumes of the Shulchan Aruch is called Yoredeah. And this is where these laws are taken from. Why does it appear now? So in our study of Jewish law, right, we started chronologically from the morning and we went through all the things of the day and so forth. And then we got to the laws of separating for charity. That was the last thing we just finished. So it's connected to tzedakah and the idea that we are taking something and we are sanctifying it. So there's that connection. And also when it comes to just how we live our lives, and we bake bread, which is such an important staple of Jewish life. So we want to make sure that we're doing it in the right way. Okay, that's a little introduction. Now let's dig into the text. One more thing. I've been teaching the Shulchan Aruch, this Kitzur, on and off since 1998. I realized this morning, which is a long time. Often we skip this section because it's not as practical. A lot of people buy challah. But because of that, I specifically want us to learn it today and for the next couple of days. One, because I think baking bread and making challah is a big thing, and a lot of people do it. So we want to make sure we all do it in the highest possible way. And also because, all of this learning helps us with our spiritual practice. Even if it's not something that we ourselves are engaged in, it expands our Jewish knowledge. And this is a really important area where we can learn. Siman 35, number 1. Isa mechameshes mine dagan. So the first thing is, not all dough is created equally. Right? The dough that you use for challah has to be from one of 5 kinds of grain: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. If it's made as a combination, multigrain, that also applies. Chayeves b'challah, they're obliged in challah. So what do? You're going to make a quantity of dough. We're going to get into the amount, but the process of separating challah requires a blessing. So kodem shemafrishim challah, before you separate a portion of your dough that's going to be burnt, you're going to say the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kisham misasav etzivanu lehafrish challah. Blessed you Hashem, right, who has sanctified his commandments to separate challah. Some add the words hamafrish challah min ha'isa, which means literally from the dough at the end. Some don't, everyone according to their custom. v'notlin kazayis mina'is. So we take the size of a kazayis from the dough. V'sorif from be'esh. We burn it in the fire. V'aminhag l'sarif b'tanur sheyoyfe sham es alechem. And we burn it in the oven where the bread will be baked. Technically today, you can fulfill the mitzvah even with the smallest amount. The custom, though, is to take a kazayas, which literally means an olive's amount, which is approximately 0.6 to 1.1 fluid ounces. Let's just say 0.6. And some also, based on lots of sage advice, say that not only do you say the blessing, but also you declare it. Hare zo challah. This is the challah. The Chochmas Adam, Rabbi Kiva Eger, the Mishnah Berurah discuss these things. So the ovens of those days that he's talking about had fire. You could literally throw the bread into the fire and it would just burn up. And it would be done usually before the bread is baked. So you separate the challah. You're going to let your dough rise. While your dough's rising, you're going to take this part and do it. Or you could do it after the second. We'll get into it. The challah cannot be eaten, right? And today what we do is we often wrap it in aluminum foil, right? Because we don't want it, we can't eat this challah. We don't want it to get mixed in with other food. Most of us are not cooking in ovens with live fires where you could actually burn it up. So you can wrap it in tin foil, and then none of the flavor of the challah, that is the spiritual flavor of the challah, can get into the oven, right? Which could later be absorbed by the food. And let's say you can't do it. Let's say you can't put it in there with aluminum foil, or you're out of aluminum foil, or something else is up. So actually you could just bury it. You don't have to burn it. We do burn it so that we can do it as closely and resemble the original way of doing challah. But if we can't burn it, it's okay to just, wrap it, throw it in the garbage. Chazon Ish says you should bury it. The custom today, though, most people are just going to wrap it in tinfoil and put it at the bottom of the oven while the oven's heating or hot. Okay. What is the amount? Kamashir Isa. Now, is it any time? Anytime you make bread, do you have to do this? And the answer is no. It only is going to, the mitzvah of taking challah is only going to be chal. It's only going to apply when we have made enough dough. So that's the next question. Kama shira isa, she's chayv b'challah, that oblige you in challah. Kol yishenaseh mechamas revis kemach. Anytime you use enough dough from 5 revaim of flour, v'hem kmo mem gimel beitzim v'chomish beitza, which is the equivalent of 43 1/5 eggs. How much is this? So in the Talmud, in the Gemara in Eruvin, page 83b, if you want to look it up, the Torah doesn't say the amount. So the sages had to extrapolate how much dough would be considered enough dough to take challah. And there they explained that the obligation of challah, which was transmitted to the Jewish people in the wilderness, is based on different, a verse that describes the size of the portion of the manna that each Jew would receive in the desert. So when the Jewish people were going through the desert, we know the miracle of the manna, which sustained us. And it's unbelievable, right? So it's so beautiful that the mitzvah of challah is connected to the manna. the size of the portion of manna that each person received was considered a tenth of an ephah. Okay, and so I won't go into all the calculations because it's hard if you don't have it written out. But this is how the volume was determined, from how much manna God gave us in the desert. Okay. And the minimum amount of challah is done by volume, not by weight. Because the weight of a given volume of flour is going to depend a lot on what grain you're using and the quality of the grain. And weight's not an accurate measurement when determining a portion of flour is large enough for challah. So the Rambam already figured that out, and others. Nevertheless, the rabbis of every generation are going to use the contemporary weights in presenting challah because that's the easiest way of getting it across. And especially today when most flour is pretty consistent, unless you're using some kind of very unusual grains. So while we could make a good case to say, hey, the challah is not, we should do it by volume, we're going to do it by weight. And that's going to be more uniform, and we're going to do it that way. And a lot of times people do it by cups today, by how many cups of flour, which we will get into as well. And we must also say that there is some uncertainty with regard to determining the exact amount and the exact measure, because the authorities offer different amounts, by which point somebody must be obliged in doing challah. And so then also there could be a difference between the obligation on taking challah and then what about making the blessing, right? And we're always going to be more stringent when it comes to the blessing. So we might have a portion of dough that we say, oh, this is enough to take challah, but maybe it's not enough to say the blessing. So you could take challah without the blessing. Let's just take a moment here before we move on to discuss what are those amounts. So Rav Chaim Na'eh, one of the main authorities on volumes and amounts and measurements, he says you're required to separate challah without a blessing from flour that weighs 3 pounds 9 ounces, 1.6 kilos or more. That's on the lower end. Well, the lower end of the higher end of the amount, which means that he's more lenient, right? The Chazon Ish said that if you have as little as 2 pounds, 10 ounces, or 1.2 kilos, you separate challah without a blessing.
Is it the same for for Pesach?
Yes, these laws are they cover any production of dough, whether the dough is going to be for challahs on a regular Shabbos or matzah that are going to end up in the matzah oven. It's a great question.
Okay.
Thank you. So now, how much do you need for the blessing? According to the Rav Chaim Na'eh, you need 3 pounds, 10.8 ounces. So, more than 3.5 pounds of challah, of dough, 1.66 kilograms. According to the Chazon Ish, you need 4 pounds, 15 ounces, almost 5 pounds, or 2.25 kilos. So, in other words, today, if you have your package of dough and you know how much challah you're making, So you can basically know before you even begin the process if you need to take challah or not. There are some women, who, I'm sure some men too, who make enough dough. They want to have the mitzvah. They want to do the mitzvah of taking the challah. So they're going to make more flour than they need. Right? They're going to make more than they need. Either they're going to cook challahs for another time and freeze them, or they could freeze part of the dough, or they're going to bake challahs and give them away so that they have the opportunity to save. Because if you're just making a small portion of challah, these blessings will not come up. Okay, that was part one. Everybody have a fabulous day. We look forward to more learning tomorrow. Have a great day.
Thank you,